Okay, hello everyone. Julija Simas here for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. I'm very excited today. I've got two wonderful scholar astrologers, I'm going to call you, from around the globe who understand very much what we're talking about and have even written things about it, made videos and some amazing graphics we will see today. So welcome today, all the way over in I was going to say San Francisco. You're near there, Gemini, yes?
Yeah,
Gemini
just
Brett.
across the bay in Richmond, California. Very close.
Righto. And with the CIA, many of us do know Agent 1123 because he's taught us so many great things over the years and continues to do so. And joining us as well, all the way from Portugal, staying up late for us, is Luis Ribeiro. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited to have you here. Now, Luis is a scholar, has written many books on the history of astrology. I think you've got a PhD on the history of astrology, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
He is writing papers on astrology in the Southern Hemisphere as we speak. So he is a wonderful person to have, or astrologer to have on this panel today. And I must admit, I am not as, let's say, well tuned to this topic. I am just very interested because I'm a Southern Hemisphere astrologer. And the topic of talking about, the North and South with the North and South nodes, if we're in the Southern Hemisphere, we're actually kind of looking at the direction of the lunar nodes changing direction as they come south. That's how I understand it. So, if I'm looking up at the ecliptic and the moon's crossing nodes, as soon as the moon crosses the south node, it is doing the opposite thing. Am I kind of correct there?
Yeah, Yulia, can I share my screen and just show a few quick
Yes, yes,
animations
yes,
and get
yes.
into some astronomy softwares to help us see this?
Okay, good.
Let,
So
let me,
I was
let
just
me,
trying to
yeah,
introduce
Especially
it.
for
Yeah.
folks who don't speak the
yeah,
language, it'd be just good to see really quickly. So let me go to two places. The first I'm going to go to is called Solar System Scope, which is just an awesome heliocentric model of the solar system, right? Kind of how we were showing it in school. When we look from Earth, this plane of Earth's orbit about the sun, or from our point of view, sun about us, that is the ecliptic. So if you're unfamiliar with that term that Yulia just used, and probably nobody here is unfamiliar with the term, the ecliptic, very importantly, is the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. Now it's shown here in purple, all right? Let me just zoom in a little bit. But the issue is, and you can see all these different blue planes on your screen, like every planet, though our solar system is relatively flat, every planet has its own orbital path. And this is true for the moon as well. So I'm just going to move this through time. And what we're going to see as I do is that the moon here, of course, like we'll see orbiting the Earth. But notice how, let me just rewind a little bit so you can see that North Pole is up and in the orientation right now. Okay, so north is up and south is down. Watch as I do this, that the moon here is going to cross the ecliptic from south to north. All right. And let me just look at this date. So I'm going to rewind here to like November 20th, because here in Stellarium software, which is planetarium, now we have like our feet on the ground. Okay. This is November 20th, 2023, coming soon to a theater called You. And notice the moon here is going to be with Saturn that day. I want to cast a chart here so we're used to seeing it as we do as astrologers. Let me just put this on the screen super quick. So I cast this first for where I'm sitting, November 20th, 2023. Let's do 7 p.m. And there's this moon, Saturn. All right. Now here's moon's node over here, right, in tropical Aries. This time moon's with Saturn in Pisces. So moon has her own orbital path. This yellow curve you see here, this is the ecliptic. That's the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. But of course, all planets have their own orbital paths. Now, when I put all those on the screen, it's like maddening, right? It's like you couldn't like chart all of that stuff on an astrology chart. What we do is we draw perpendicular lines from where planets are to the ecliptic plane, to the heart of the zodiac, to the path of the sun. All right, so let me just show you Moon's orbital path, which is here in silver. And Moon's path crossing the sun's path from the south to the north right there, that's the north node. All right, let me just go a few days forward. And you're going to see the moon here crossing the node sometime between the nights where I sit of November 23rd and November 24th. Let's do that in the chart. Right, so here's moon at the node on the 23rd and moon crossing the north node on the 24th. Let me go back and just show you. Here's the 23rd and moon is south of the ecliptic. It's easier to see when I unsupersize the moon. And then as the moon gets to this point in her monthly travel, the north lunar node, where her path crosses the path of the sun from the south to the northern side, then moon moves into what we call north celestial latitude, north of the plane, okay? So you, I'm sure, have heard the nodes expressed as the dragon's head and dragon's tail. This is, that goes way back and in many traditions, and the whole idea of dragons or serpents eating the moon or the sun at eclipse time. Well, the moon's path snakes above and below the path of the sun. But importantly, we used to call them the ascending node, like in the northern hemisphere sky when the moon crosses her north node or when Mars crosses his north node or whatever. Our experience is they're going higher up to the top of the sky than the sun does in those degrees, and at the south node comes down, right? But the opposite is true in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, so the
I hope
ascending
that
and
helps. When I come back,
descending.
I'll flip it over.
Yeah, so the ascending and descending, where we get the north node name and the south node name being descending, you know, from the other from our hemisphere is the opposite.
Right. So important,
The
actually, let me just show
descending
that real quick one more time, and then I will shut my mouth. So look, here's the moon ascending from south to north. Hold on, I'm out of control. There's from south to north, okay? Well, if we just turn this whole thing upside down, or turn your head upside down,
Yeah,
right, you would see that instead of going up, you'd see it going down.
yeah,
Right. And if I go here again, let me just go back to this November 23rd time and find the moon. Here I'm seeing day by day, and I'm just going to rewind days and then move forward. Okay, so I'm going back a few days, and then you'll just see the moon crossing the sun's path, like towards the top of the sky. And actually, it's going to be easier for me to see that if I go here too. Okay. So let me rewind again a few days. And moon on her path crosses the sun's path or ascends across the sun's path. And because I'm looking from the northern hemisphere, this is cast for Richmond, California, where I live. There's moon moving high in the sky. But if I just take that same motion, and we're going to look instead of from the northern hemisphere, from the southern hemisphere, where I have to look to the other side of the sky to see the moon anyway. Notice that I'm going to rewind in days again. Here's the moon at the north node, but now it's crossing the ecliptic from celestial to terrestrial. So you can see why we call them ascending and descending.
yeah.
The issue is that what ascends in the northern hemisphere, just flip your head around, descends in the southern hemisphere. Like I got to go do a retreat with Julija and the Cosmic Intelligence Agency in Melbourne some time ago. And, you know, I'm used to looking at Orion, like pointing his club up, but there he points his club down. And it's just like this simple. Like if I'm looking at this hand constellation, from here, the palm is closer to the ground. For you, the fingers are closer to the ground. You see what I'm saying? So when we're looking from opposite points of view at the same thing, we're having an opposite experience of it. And so again, like the ascending node, as the North Node was once called, it actually is where we experience moon descending across the ecliptic path of the Southern Hemisphere. So the names change to North Node and South Node to have more of a global reality or truth.
Thanks for explaining that. But the issue then becomes the attitude that comes with, you know, your North Node is the direction you're heading to, you know, it's your soul's evolution, and everything else, you know, is best to be left behind. Luis, what can you add to all of that?
Well, I don't see the nodes in that perspective, so
Okay.
I don't have
Okay,
that
yeah,
problem.
right.
But well, adding to what, what Brett was saying, you know, that it is, you know, what the problem is, what is ascending in the north is not the same that ascending in the south,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem. And historically, that has been one of the problems with the Southern Hemisphere. I'm just going to give my 2 cents as an
Oh no,
historian
that's
here.
fantastic. Yeah.
So what happens, and I'm going to reduce this a little bit towards the nodes, so we don't. With the nodes, there's not too much of a discussion that I could find yet. But the big problem that happens when they cross to the Southern Hemisphere, and especially when they start colonizing and settling in the Southern Hemisphere and practicing astrology more commonly, is how do things work? Because there are several problems. One of them is the seasons are inverted. So if the seasons are inverted, that creates a huge problem, especially to a tradition, and we're talking about late 16th, early 17th century. This causes a problem to a tradition that is grounded on Ptolemy's explanation of how the signs and the zodiac and the planetary rulerships work. He associates the rulerships of the zodiac and the exaltations and all of that to the seasons. So then comes a question. So if the seasons are inverted, do the rulerships of the signs are the same? And that's the first big question.
Yeah.
And historically, what we see the first authors talking about is, well, then we should invert it. And one of the first, if I think it's the first one, I couldn't find anyone else, is Cardano, the famous Girolamo Cardano, who says, well, and gives a small note in his book on the Tetrabiblos, well, in the Southern Hemisphere, this has to be inverted. And that discussion only comes up almost 50 years later, more than 50 years later, with Tommaso Campanella, who expands on that and inverts the whole system of dignities for the Southern Hemisphere as a theory. So there is the theory that if the sun is exalted in Aries in the Northern Hemisphere, then in the Southern Hemisphere it should exalt in Libra because the seasons are inverted.
Yeah.
And that creates a problem. That's the first view. But all of these people who are presenting this view are theoreticians. So they're following Ptolemy to the letter. And what they say is, if you follow Ptolemy to the letter, then you have to invert the whole system. The other side of this question is very interesting, is when you have practitioners in South America, especially in Peru, who are now practicing astrology there. Most of them are physicians. And they start to see things differently. And one of them even says that, well, we know that Campanella says this. However, that is not what we observe here. So the rulerships maintain the same. The seasons do invert. And for example, if the sun is in Aries, is sanguine for the spring in the north, it will be melancholic in the autumn of the south. That's not a problem. That's not a problematic thing. The thing is, they think that no, there's no inversion at all. We do not observe in practice any kind of inversion of rulership. So there are no inversion of qualities. But this discussion comes at a time where astrology is already declining in the universities and in the academic grounds. So the discussion seems to die out as we
Right.
reach the end of the 17th century. So there's no conclusion to this debate. And we have
Well,
several interesting
bringing it
authors,
back.
Morin de Villefranche, and Morin de Villefranche also puts discussions. Moranos, which is quite
Yeah.
a well-known astrologer, also poses that question and asks that question around, do we invert this or not? And he also concludes that you do not.
Yeah. It doesn't
And
make
that's
sense.
You answered a question I was going to ask you, Luis, because I like the way that you present temperament in your texts, and of course, like when we look to the sun, besides just the element that the sun is in, most importantly the seasonal energy. So I was excited to ask you, do you reverse for the Southern Hemisphere temperament considerations based upon the temperament or as the seasonal energies? And as you said, you do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's a cool question, Julia. Like, if because the moon descends across the south node in the northern hemisphere experience, but ascends at the south node in the southern hemisphere experience, and you're kind of considering maybe a switch for southern hemisphere charts, which I imagine you're looking at more or maybe most of, what would you do at the equator?
I don't know yet. Well, again, it's almost like being on a cusp, isn't it? Like you talk about something on the cusp and it's integrating both, it's right in the middle. But I've always looked at the reversal of the zodiac in the sense seasonally as temperamental for sure. You don't swap and say you're a Libra because you're born, in March or at the end of March. It's like being, I'm born a late Pisces and in high summer, really the end of summer in Australia. And so I'm a summer Pisces, not a, so temperamentally I've got that element, it's not a cold Pisces, let's say. So yes, thinking of those things, and we've seen this working in, let's say, the more traditional astrologers I know here that have seen the bushfire seasons coming through. And I remember one particular year, there was a stellium in Aquarius and this huge bushfire came through. Now, when you read Aquarius temperament, it's cold and it's, it's air, it's cold. How else do you explain it? But this was hot air, right? And, it was wild hot air, and it was a stellium in Aquarius. But we saw it, with that opposition of the temperament, so to speak. So we've got to use that hot, cold, dry, moist in sort of different way. Is that's what you mean? Yes.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, the seasonal issue, right? So my big question has been, all right, if the tropical zodiac is not star-based, and it just isn't, and that breaks like the astrologer, the young astrology student's heart at some point, right? You get your phone app out, and I'm looking at the moon Venus conjunction today in Libra, and I'm like, wait a second, that's a giant lion. And they're in the head of the priestess. And by the way, I say priestess, not Virgo, to differentiate constellations and signs because they're very different things, as I was taught to, right? So then the question is, okay, well, what's the zodiac? And tropical astrologers so often revert to, oh, it's a seasonal thing. But then we have this great problem of, well, right now for me, the sun is falling in the sky, the leaves are falling from the trees, and for Julia, as we consider down under, and Melbourne, the sun is springing up to its summer solstice height, and the flowers are springing from the ground, right? And so the question is, well, what is the zodiac? I mean, not to mention that even in the Northern Hemisphere experience of temperament or seasons, it's a very different reality in William Lilly's London than it is for the Polynesian astrologers in Hawaii, right? And so the question is, what is the zodiac? And so let me just go to the armillary sphere real quick, right? So importantly, like two planes that you need to know here. One is the plane of the day, right? So why do we have days? Because the earth spins, right? And we here on Earth experience our daily motion, the spinning Earth, by watching the sky spin about us, yeah? And the plane of that motion is the equator. Just like seriously, simply Earth's equator, right? So spin, I call that the circle of matter, because though the spinning of the Earth brings us such hits as sunrise and sunset, it's really truly just an earthly motion, right? The secondary motion of our planet, that's the primary, our day, and sunrise and sunset is our primary astronomical experience. The secondary motion is our orbit of the sun, right? And that's on a different plane because, as you've seen it in globes and whatnot, Earth's tilt, right? That's called the ecliptic plane, right? So that's our orbital path about the sun, the plane of the year, right? And the ecliptic and the equator cross at 2 points. Those are the equinox points, right? So equinox, which means equinite, we think of as when the sun is at the equinox in 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, which isn't exactly true anyway. But it's really these 2 points where the ecliptic, the heart of the zodiac and the sun's path, and for the most part the planets, intersects with the equator. Those are the only 2 points of the zodiac that rise due east, set due west everywhere on Earth, right? And those points, they're so crucial. So like when I was engaging with Moon and Venus this morning, I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was out there, I was seeing them very close to this point that's west from the center of the Earth. So even before we talk about the moon's nodes,
Zero Libra, they were meeting at 0 Libra, yeah?
yeah, I mean, they're one in some change, but they were there. And amazingly, because they both have north celestial latitude, they were in a southern degree of the zodiac, but north of the equator. And that's kind of advanced, but it was an amazing thing to experience. It felt like a really great like setting for our conversation today.
Oh,
Because they were
you can
south
show
and
us.
north.
Yeah, you can show us, or maybe we'll end with it or something.
Yeah, I'd be happy. I'd like to show you some images and whatnot. But anyway, you know, why is this Libra? Especially because it's not aligned to the constellation of the scales. And the answer is because it's this crossing point, right? The other crossing, 0 Aries, very importantly, is due east of the center of the Earth where we are all one. And a much easier way for me to show that is just talking about Earth's poles, right? So Earth's rotational axis literally defines the cardinal directions, all right? Of like, not just of where I am or where Yulia is or where Luis is or where any of you are, for like for Earth, for our planet, right? So we have a North Pole and we have Santa's place and we have a South Pole, right? And they are completely defined by this, our daily rotation. Now, where that North Pole is leaning towards on the ecliptic plane is the Tropic of Cancer, tropical Cancer. So as we in our yearly motion orbit the sun like this, there's one moment each year when that northern axis of Earth, the North Pole, is leaning towards the sun. And we know this is maximum sun in the northern hemisphere, summer solstice, the least amount of sun in the southern hemisphere, winter solstice, right? But very importantly, when we experience sun ingressing tropical Cancer, it shines directly above the Tropic of Cancer. And tropic comes from the Greek tropikos, which means turn around. Because at that time, the sun has found its northern bounds, and now it stops and turns around and starts going south, right? So even more importantly than the nodes of moon and sun, or maybe more basic, more fundamental, and with more historic challenge as Luis is presenting here, right? The nodes of the Earth and the sun, these crossing points of celestial circles, these circles, the equator, the plane of the day, the ecliptic, the plane of the year, the crossing points are 0 tropical Aries, 0 tropical Libra, named for the tropicos, okay? And so it's very easy to see Cancer as the north point, Capricorn as the south point, all right? And these cardinal signs, as we now call them, we didn't used to, they align, their cusps align to Earth's cardinal directions.
Yeah.
Now, the strange thing is we don't live at the center of Earth, right? We live at the surface of Earth, right? And so like, what is north for Earth, or what is, let me say it this way, what is east for the center of Earth, and that's 0 Aries? It's not always east where I am. And when it is east where I am, it's not east in Portugal or in Australia, right? Because we're on the surface spinning about this thing. But very importantly, the tropical zodiac, it is direct, like so many ancient systems of wisdom traditions, it is directionally aligned. And in fact, I would suggest it's directionally defined.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. What about you, Luis?
Yeah, no, what Brett is saying is it's part of the essential motion of the Earth. I think that's the thing, and that's why we have a change, a historical change towards the tropical zodiac, is this idea that you have a fixed structure that doesn't jiggle around with time, as we have the procession of the equinoxes with the constellations, and that is this stability and this idea of the equality of the equator, and then the difference created by the ecliptic, which is slightly disaligned and creates the difference of the seasons, that creates this harmony and this flow of things, of nature. And I think that is the basis of this alignment, is the basis why at a certain point we shift towards a tropical reference point in our astrology. Of course, as I was saying, historically that creates a problem or not. The explanation, the Ptolemaic explanations create a problem. But if we disregard them, as they eventually do, what they say is that, well, Ptolemy was wrong in many things, and perhaps his explanation is not the best one. So because we're not seeing what he claims, and they shift. And going back to the nodes historically, I couldn't find any reference to inversion of the nodes or treat the nodes differently in the Southern Hemisphere, although they do alert that the difference of latitude of the planets have to be taken into account, because in the Northern Hemisphere, a planet that has a northern latitude is considered more powerful, more elevated over anything that has southern latitude or lesser latitude. But that inverts in the Southern Hemisphere, and they do caution you have to be careful because that relationship is inverted. So whatever is above in the north is below in the south, and you need to account that if you were counting its effects in the south.
Yeah,
And that, for
wow.
example, is quite effective in mundane configurations, where the elevation of latitude of the planets is considered to see which one is more powerful. I was giving this example quite recently with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. One of the parameters to interpret the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is that which one is more elevated. And that has to do with dignity, but also latitude. So if Saturn, for example, I think in this conjunction, Saturn was more elevated than Jupiter, we would see Saturn is more powerful in the effects and not Jupiter. But that will reverse completely for the Southern Hemisphere.
Wow.
In which Jupiter will have a higher latitude. So the story is slightly different, because Jupiter has more power than Saturn there. So the effects will be considerably disparate. So the problem is this didn't develop historically. And all of these minutiae of astrology simply were lost once astrology gets out of the academic, cultured, erudite sphere. And only now it's starting to move then with the recovery of the tradition and rethinking how these things work. But I think we're still in the first steps of really creating a philosophy and a mechanism. Okay, how does this work? How do we approach this? And this discussion on the nodes it's one of them.
Yes, it's just
Does
the
this
beginning,
make a
isn't it
difference?
now? Yeah, you brought up all these other aspects of the issue. Like we have talked about, you know, the signs changing and that over the past. But yeah, it's almost like a continual dialogue that needs to happen somehow with interested people, that we can
Exactly.
start something more with.
Yeah.
When you talk about you know, being more dignified with latitude and, you know, all that sort of thing. I mean, the mind boggles when you start, you know, you do traditional astrology and on all the aspects of looking at that.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll have to ask more of the
Yeah.
Southern traditional astrologers how they work it, but I don't think they change much.
I don't, yeah, I don't think so. For example, one of the things I was searching for is, do they change the meaning of the node?
Yeah.
Because in traditional astrology, the nodes are more simple in their effects. You know, the northern node is considered to increase. They're
Oh,
always
that's,
points at
yeah. Yeah.
instability
Okay. Yeah.
because of the eclipses, but
Yeah.
the northern node increases because, as Brett was showing, the moon rises up
Yeah.
in the heavens in the northern hemisphere, and the south node is considered to diminish things because the
Yeah.
moon goes
Is
south
moving
and it's
down.
less
Yeah.
visible, loses visibility.
Yeah.
So, but this is based on the northern experience of the
Yeah.
phenomena. If we consider this very simple association, then it should then the southern node should increase in the south because the moon is at a higher latitude, and the northern node should decrease
Is
because it's lowering, it's coming down
yeah.
from the heaven. So if it works like this, and this is a big if that's how it works, then it should be inverted.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we need to test it.
We need to
Yeah,
test more. Yeah. What
I'd
kind
like
of
to
tests
show
do you do?
few pictures from my astronomy
Yeah.
class. Just
Sure.
I like feel like everybody here knows, but we have a lot of people here right now and in the future, and you know it's like confusing stuff when we talk about
Let
celestial
me, Brett,
spheres.
let me share just
Oh
a
yes,
diagram I
please,
did
Luis. Yeah.
that
Oh, great.
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
illustrate. It might overlap a bit with yours as well, but I wasn't sure what we were
No, it's
both.
all good. It helps explain and sort of
Yeah.
you know, really
Okay. So
clear it up.
let me
Thank you.
just do this
How
very
good is this, guys? Yoo-hoo.
I want to check in with the chat. Oh, somebody asked what this is. I'll get back to it.
okay.
We need to have an
Okay.
agent 1123 toolkit.
Good
Okay.
idea.
So let's have this very simple sketch, you know. So we have us two, Brett and then me, in the northern hemisphere, and Julie here down
Yeah.
in the south, and we have
Go
here
upside down.
the equator of the Earth. So, and this is the equator, which is then expanded to the celestial equator that defines the north and the south. That's how we determine things. How do we project this in terms of the nodes and the ecliptic? So let's draw it at the ecliptic, the zodiac. So at the line of the ecliptic, as Brett was showing earlier on the software. And then we know that the path of the moon, as was explained, it's going to have two areas, one where it's north of the ecliptic, the other where it's south of the ecliptic. And it is this conjunction point, which we call the node. In this case, the lunar south node, because it's moving towards south. The path, the direction is moving towards south. So this is how we experience in the north. And what we'll see here is that the moon, as Brett was showing us in the other way, will be moving towards the southern region of the ecliptic. Move south. So this means that it's getting lower in the horizon for a northern observer. The thing is that if you flip this around to put into Julia's perspective, and you see it from, so the south of the ecliptic and the south is getting that way, the north is now down, then the same path, the same observer will see the moon rising above the ecliptic. So it's getting more visible and higher in the southern horizon. So, and this is the problem that we have here. If you flip it around, we're going to have an ascension of the moon in the south node. So again, it's increasing in latitude. If it's increasing in latitude, increasing in altitude from the horizon, it should increase if that is the rule. So it's another way of showing what Brett was always also showing us with the software.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you, Luis.
beautiful. And from the outer view, which is so cool. I'm
Yes.
gonna skip a bunch of things that I was gonna show, but let me show.
Let me just do this. So north, if for an inner
Oh, I'm
view,
sorry, Louis.
sort of no problem. So sort of a diagrammatic. So you'll see from an Earth-based observer, you will see the moon, coming down. So this altitude here is going to be lesser.
So
But
that's South Node in Libra, right, Luis?
exactly, this is the current position. So what's going to happen for any sudden observer, such as Joy, is she's going to see the moon gradually moving and getting higher in the horizon. So exactly the opposite effect from the northern hemisphere.
Yeah,
And
right.
this is of course for everyone who's watching. So I think several versions of the same thing might help clarify it. Yeah.
Well, we have peace in the Southern Hemisphere. Not really. No,
That's
that's
because
not
there's
true
less
in
people.
Africa. In Africa and a few places, there's still lots going on. But I mean, one thing I thought about the transiting nodes, that we're looking at, and the eclipse, hotspots and what have you. So we just recently had the Voice referendum in Australia that was a definite no. And so if we think about it, the ascending node was in Libra, not Aries down here. It makes more sense to the outcome of the time. Venus was the ruler of the the Libra node. She was in Virgo in detriment, and reading it that way was very significant in the way that it split the country up. It wasn't very Aries, like, let's go, it's going to happen, it's a moving forward scenario. It was much more Libra-like, right? With these two factions splitting the country of no and yes. Anyway, just something to think about in the way that I have started thinking about things. This.
I would argue, however, if you're going to flip North and South Node for the Southern Hemisphere, then you should also say Venus is exalted in Virgo. Because I believe,
there you go, right.
I mean, this is my own theory, and it's nothing.
Well, that's what Luis was talking about as well. The significations of what's more relevant. Yeah.
Right. So the question is, like, is there an astronomical reality to Venus's exaltation in Pisces? And from my point of view, there is, and it's this. Venus is said to be the benefic of the evening sect, right? Night sect.
Mm-hmm.
So when Venus is evening star in Pisces, this is the highest the Northern Hemisphere observer will ever see Venus above the ground, the highest altitude. All right. Whereas in Virgo,
the opposite.
we see Venus fall. And the reason why, and this is absolutely different between North and South Hemisphere. So the tradition, we called them straight and crooked signs. And it doesn't mean like, clear and corrupt.
Yeah, so the straight and crooked is opposite as well. The way
right. This is a very physical thing because the equator and the ecliptic. And one of you asked, by the way, this is called an armillary sphere. And I found this one on eBay, although I had to take it apart and change some things because most of the ones that you'll find are wrong. They should have Cancer at the Tropic of Cancer, and usually they're backwards, and it's a crime. And Louis, this is another thing I wanted to ask you because I bet you can show me where to get a good one. Anyway, because the ecliptic is not coincident with the equator, like as the sky is spinning, right? We have the ascendant each day, and this is why traditionally it's called the rudder, I'm sure, ruddering back and forth against the cardinal directions. So I'm just speaking tropical astronomy, there's northern signs, there are Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, and sorry, Cancer, Leo, and Virgo, and then southern signs Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, right?
Yeah.
And the way that the signs rise and why they're called straight and crooked signs is some signs rise straight, and therefore they're signs what we call of long ascension, right? Because you're just getting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and some signs rise quite crooked like this, and then they're rising like 5 degrees at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is absolutely reversed for the northern and southern hemisphere. It's also particular to the latitude where you are on Earth. So in horary astrology, which is finding timings, for example, often based upon the different ascending signs based on how long it takes for them to rise, these are things that can get reversed. My theory is that Venus, right, who in Latin as morning star is Lucifer, fallen angel, is like in fall in Virgo, is because that sign in the northern hemisphere sky is very straight at the ascension. And so when Venus is in that sign as morning star, one day
really quick in
she has
Virgo.
Well, it's slow, but it's a very vertical fall.
Right.
Right. Whereas like when Venus is in Aries as a morning star here, applying to the sun, she's like moving horizontally day to day across the sky. So there, I mean, there's nothing written. This is a theory of mine, but it's why I suggest if you're flipping the north and south hemispheres from the southern hemisphere point of view of the nodes,
how much do you flip?
they're looking at some of the perhaps potential like astronomical keys to some of these rules that we use and seeing if they need to flip too. As Luis was mentioning before, there was an argument like, hey, if people are going to teach that the sun rules Leo because it's the hottest month of the year, then it ain't true in Peru, right? So do you need to flip it? But Julia, I bet you it's worked for you. And I want to speak quickly about why I'm sure and how I, in contemplating this challenge of the lunar nodes from the southern hemisphere point of view, like I realized that the tropical zodiac is completely global and nothing needs to get flipped around.
Right. No, I totally agree with that because it's the band of the ecliptic that, you know, that binds us, so to speak, but it's understanding the movement that, you know, more people need to understand what's behind it to understand that it's okay to have it as a, you know, a global zodiac, let's say, right?
Right.
The topic of this North Node, South Node experience is more so, let's just say the significance that we've seen of how, you know, the North Node represents so much about, you know, your direction and where you must go, and you know, it's very big out there in that sense, right? You know,
Right. So, but why does it represent future?
Well, it's the ascending node. So in the northern hemisphere, it's the ascending node. So it's like
no. So this is the question that I want to answer for you from a global perspective.
No, well, this is what I'm just saying. This is what's out there. This is what most people understand.
Right. But I'm going to show you why it's not because it goes up.
Okay.
But rather because it goes to the future. So Julia, you were recently in Bath and you went to William Herschel's place, right?
Not that recently, but 5 years ago.
Right. So what's William Herschel most known for to astrologers?
Discovering Uranus.
Right. Which, by the way, can be seen with the naked eye. And this is the best time. This is one of the best years to see Uranus with your naked eyeball. And why? Because we're closest to Uranus. In the middle of Uranus's retrograde. That's Sun opposite Uranus. That's Earth passing Uranus by. And that's happening at new moon on Monday or maybe some Tuesday for you. So dark sky.
Have you seen it with the naked eye? I've seen it through the telescope.
I have. Yeah, and I saw Vesta. I saw Vesta on the same night. Right. So after William and Caroline Herschel discovered Uranus quite by accident, comet hunting, we were able to calculate or catch up to the ephemeris for Uranus much more quickly than we would through observation alone, because there were naked eye recordings of Uranus, not knowing it was a planet going way back to like ancient Chinese astronomy, right? So we had these data points from way back in time. And it's kind of an important thing. Another thing, looking at ancient recordings that led William Herschel to another very important discovery, which for me completely solves the global nature of the tropical zodiac and the future basis for North Node, if you want to go there, is this, and it's called the apex of the sun's way. So I don't know, and I haven't seen how it was written, but as a fly on the wall, it looks like this. William Herschel is comparing his star tables to those of 500 years ago and 500 years before that, whatever. And he's seeing that this reality that now is known as the apex of the sun's way, and what I was contemplating when trying to solve this nodal riddle some years ago, is where is Earth going in space? Right? Because we know that not only are we orbiting the sun, but the sun's also moving and taking the whole solar system with it, right? So where are we going? This is called the apex of the sun's way, and William Herschel, with others, is credited for discovering this. So the metaphor that you've all experienced is like when you're driving on a road in the forest, and the trees on the side of the road in front of you appear to be spreading apart, and the ones in your rear view seem to be collapsing in on one another. So it is with the stars. The stars around Vega in the northern sky are separating from one another very slowly. And the stars around Sirius in the southern sky are collapsing in on each other.
Right.
Now, you'll never see Sirius at Earth's North Pole. You'll never not see Vega there, clouds allowing. You'll never see Vega at Earth's South Pole. In other words, we're moving through space towards the north.
Right.
Okay. So
So
here's
it's more
my
about following your sun.
demonstration with Capricorn Smurf and Cancer Smurf. All right. So Cancer Smurf is in the north and Capricorn Smurf's in the south. Right. Let's say they're sitting on a train that has benches facing both directions, as trains do. And then let's say there's this character that's just like pacing back and forth on the train, right? To Capricorn Smurf's experience, this guy's coming towards me and away from me. And when it goes away from me, it's going towards Cancer Smurf, right? Now the question is it moving forward or backwards? This cat would say he's moving like away, and now he's moving towards, right? But they're sitting on a train, and the train is going this way. So even though these two passengers on the train are having opposite experiences of the thing, the train is still moving in one direction. And the train called Earth is moving north. So when we experience the moon cross her north node, she's literally astronomically moving towards a place where we are going. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so
they're both all together moving that way. Yeah, everything's
right.
moving.
This is like, so let's just say I'm sitting in the back of the train, you're sitting in the front of the train looking at me. But if we're going that way and you're sitting backwards, right, what your experience is like coming towards you is going forward.
Right.
And so this is like, it's a head trip. Those are the kind of like thought experiments I like to do to try to like tackle this thing, because I'm attacked so often as a tropical astronomer and a tropical astrologer. But there really is a global nature to the entire zodiac. And there's another key here that I read some time ago in Robert Lawler's Voices of the First Day. Right, Robert Lawler, an Englishman who's lived in Australia and now lives in Tasmania. And he, in I guess having permission to transmit many elder statements from the bush in Australia, there was an elder who said, it's long been known the North Hemisphere is like the bow of the ship, and the South Hemisphere is like the stern. Right? So that's the entire thing. If I'm pacing back and forth on a ship that's going that way, right, I'm moving towards my future and away from it. And though I, like Luis, don't really work with the lunar nodes in that evolutionary astrology context, I do different things with them.
Can you tell me how you work with them then? Just I mean, both of you, I'd love to hear. Again, Luis is saying increase and decrease, and makes sense to again what we're looking at them for. Yeah, tell us a bit
Yeah,
about
I'd
how
love to
you
hear
work
what
with this
Luis and
story.
what you have to say about that before I answer.
Yeah. Well, with the tradition, I think it's quite simple. You have the northern node as being a place of increase and of fertility in that sense, and the southern node being a place of decrease and sterility. Um, a minor malefic and a benefic for the northern node, the malefic for the south. And so there's this idea, and for example, that's the idea that if you have the northern node in the 10th house in the chart, and there are other circumstances that corroborate, you would have success in your career, in your public life, etc. If you have the southern node, then you might face scandals and difficulties and instabilities and a fall of some sorts due to that position there. So I see them with that point of increase and decrease, and also as generally points of instability. I think the nodes do not stabilize things. They excite whatever moves around them, less or more depending on which node we're talking about. And this is more or less the approach I have. I do not interpret them by sign, by house eventually, but specifically they become more visible or more noticeable if you have a planet conjoining the nodes. So it gives you that quality.
Yeah. And in Southern Hemisphere charts, you're not thinking of that differently?
No, I have. Yeah, it's an idea on the back of my mind for many years, but I would need to test it.
Yes. Okay.
Luis,
We would
you
need
were
to see if
speaking.
there's any evidence of this change. Yeah.
You were speaking earlier about, like, in the tradition, this idea, and I'll show some slides. Actually, let me just show the slides first, and I'll ask you this question. I'm gonna push the right sequence of buttons. Just a few here. This is George Harrison. And you can see a chart thanks to Astro Gold in the center of the screen. So late degrees, tropical Libra rising, and a Scorpio moon. And so the chart's telling us that the moon's beneath the ground, right? And yet, the same moment in time, George Harrison's birth in Liverpool, February 24th, 1943, 11:42 p.m., in Stellarium astronomy software shows the moon above the ground. So how is this possible? And this is celestial latitude, right? So how is the moon beneath the ground, but also below? And what would this do for us, like, astrologically, right? So you likely have come across in your astrocartography these statements in Zodiaco and in Mundo. In Zodiaco is the projection of any star, planet, whatever, to the ecliptic plane, to the heart of the zodiac, the circle of our chart wheels. Whereas in Mundo is from Earth, it's like also considers a star's distance from the ecliptic. So when George Harrison was born, the in Zodiaco position of the moon had not yet risen, but the moon already had. So is the moon in the first or in the 12th? Which is this cool question. Now, just as when the moon this is north of the ecliptic plane, when the moon has northern celestial latitude, it's going to rise before the degree she projects to, right? Just like you see here, she will also set after the degree that she projects to. Right? So if I just look at this chart on the day of George Harrison's birth, and I could say, oh, moon rises at this time and moon rises set is at this time. So moon spent this much time visible above the ground. It's not accurate. We have to consider the moon's altitude is based also upon her latitude, how far from the ecliptic. And the general rule is planets, points, stars with northern latitude, northern celestial latitude, they rise before the degree they project to and set after the degree they project to in the northern hemisphere. And so this, I'm sure, as Luis was telling us before, like in the tradition, northern latitude was favored because there's more observation, right? There's more time for you to engage with the moon in this case than otherwise than when in southern latitude. Now the opposite is true in the southern hemisphere. When a planet has northern latitude in the southern hemisphere, it rises after its degree and it sets before its degree, thereby spending less time in the sky. So Luis, my question for you, with all that being said, because I wanted to show that to folks, is how much are you considering latitude in your astrology? And would you reverse any delineations that you make based upon celestial latitude for Southern Hemisphere natives?
Well, I think we would have to, because, for example, where this affects directly is on the computation of directions. So what's going to happen when you have this kind of extreme latitude of the moon, you're going to have directions that repeat themselves without latitude and with latitude to, I don't know, in the range of 3 years of distance. I don't know exactly, I don't have in my mind which is the maximum, but you can have the same direction happening 2-4 years afterwards because of the extreme latitude of the planet, in this case the moon. But for example, the tradition says something very interesting when you have these extreme latitudes. And for example, for the moon, as you well know, this is going to happen at its maximum when the moon will going to be at 90 degrees from the nodes. So it will be on the extreme points of maximum northern latitude or maximum southern latitude. And authors like Ptolemy, when they are delineating the mindset, and I'm going to give a lecture about this on Saturday, so that's why I have this fresh. When there's this extreme of the moon is in an extreme position, they say that the emotional range and the instinctive range of the person is off the chart. So you have a sort of a pinch for lunacy. So the moon is out of its normal, it's too far from the ecliptic and has that anomalous behavior. And
almost sounds like out of bounds moon. It's not
out of bounds moon comes exactly from this concept. It's
exactly,
still the idea from this concept,
right. Yeah.
It is the higher latitude of the planets which makes them have extreme expressions, for higher or for lower, depending on where you're looking at, from the north or from the south, but off the ecliptic. So they can create unexpected things, abnormal behavior, something like that. And with the moon, which is more, it's visible because the moon is part of the moon Mercury structure of mindset and mentality. That would be more visible. And that is something comes from the Hellenistic period with this experience. So so that is somehow accounted in the structure. They don't have a very specific explanation, but they do realize that there's an anomaly there in these extremes, particularly for the moon. For the other planets, yes, but they don't mention specifically specific effects.
Yeah, right.
Never seen it.
We need more examples and more gosh, how would we do more research on this? Collect lots of we'll have to think about it.
Yeah, we have to isolate cases. Yeah, isolate cases where this is visible.
Well, Julia, one of the things I say when people challenge me with the kind of seasonal idea of the tropical zodiac and that therefore it should be reversed in the southern hemisphere, I'm like, yeah, but Julija Simas. Like, what do you mean? I was like, and other great astrologers in the southern hemisphere who are working with the tropical zodiac, if it didn't work, they'd be reporting, like
absolutely.
That it doesn't
Yeah. The Aries I know are not Librans. I'll tell you that much.
I want to answer a question that Jared asked here, which is important. So he says, so every single time the moon crosses the north node, it's in line with northern movement experience from the Earth's perspective. Absolutely. So you can't say ascending if you want to speak globally. Because again, as Luis showed us, as I showed you earlier, when the moon is at the north node, we in the northern hemisphere experience an ascent. Right now, if you feel like the whole purpose of incarnation is then to ascend to the heavens or something, right? You can feel like some kind of future connotation there, I guess, if you're a good lad, and then the descent maybe coming down to earth. So ascending and descending, these terms are very specific to hemisphere. And then interestingly, at the equator, what do you do? Like the equator is not north or south, it's both and neither. It's right.
That's the same problem with the inversion of the zodiac. What are you
Absolutely.
going to do in the tropics and in the Arctic and Antarctic latitudes? Then you have to rethink astrology also for the poles and for the tropics. So it becomes a nightmare, and it's absolutely impractical
Right. And I
to
mean,
do that.
even if you go only seasonal, shouldn't Portugal and Norway have a different thing, right? Um,
Exactly.
but regardless of whether you're at equator, Melbourne, Australia, and Portugal, when the moon moves north across the north node, she is literally moving closer to Polaris, right? She's moving north in the sky. So we experience it as up, they experience that as down, but this is what I'm saying, it is future because Earth is moving north. So while I don't personally use the nodes as this is where I'm coming from and this is where I'm going, I will say there is an astronomical justification for that type of usage. I'm the kind of guy that likes to have an astronomical reason for my astrological
That's why we
delineation.
asked you.
Well, you learn enough technique and you finally get beyond that, right? But like I prefer primary directions to solar arc directions because there's an astronomical basis for it. Even though it's still dilated, weird fractal time, it at least is based upon an actual thing that happened
Yeah,
versed upon this kind of like
yeah.
geometrical thing, right? Like that's just how I'm wired, at least at this time in my life. I used to say astrology is not some symbolic language, it's the poetic breath of nature. Now I say astrology is not some symbolic language alone, it's the poetic breath of nature, because there's plenty I do that is fully symbolic.
Yeah.
So, Yulia, are you working with the lunar nodes kind of in that
Well,
evolutionary
I was just
astrology
going to say
model?
something. I mean, I like what you've, what do you call it, told us or showed us right now with the future. Everything's moving together in particular direction. When I was studying astrology and the North and South nodes, my teacher, Brian Clark, always said the nodes are just an area that you have to move through to find your sun fully, right? And so, the direction of the sun now becomes more of the ruler of our future, of our direction, of our purpose, which there's been just so much significance on the North Node, and the node being, this is, if you don't do this, you are not fulfilled and you have not evolved and you are not, doing something according to your life. And I'm very concerned about how much significance is put on that, right? That this is the way that you should go, because a lot of astrologers use it like that. And that's what I've seen. So I use the nodes much more as an axis, right? That's an axis that is working together. Not so much reversing it yet, because again, haven't done enough work, but it does make more sense with my own nodes and my career, coming from, Cancer Capricorn. The North Node, traditionally understood was the North Node in Cancer, but it makes more sense that the North Node is Capricorn for me and my life. And a lot of and again, I will do more looking into that from people in the Southern Hemisphere that I've talked to, who agree with their nodes, again, being so much sort of delivered to be looked at in one particular way, to consider that, it could be the reversal of that down here. So, I'm not saying to reverse that, I'm just saying to consider that. And if you're being put on trajectory to sort of follow your North Node and you're from the South, just rethink it a bit. The other dilemma that comes in with that, guys, is that, relocational astrology, but that's another thing. If you're going to relocate and, your life completely changes if you come south.
Well,
Anyway.
here's an interesting relocational thing. So we know, right, the planets will stay in the same signs because we're just looking at the same moment of time. If I
Yeah,
relocate
yeah,
myself to
yeah.
Portugal, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts at 7:39 p.m. But in Portugal, it was like midnight. My sun is IC line is right there, right? So the sun is still Scorpio. That's just my birth. But I was born with the sun in the sixth. In Portugal at that time, it was the sun in the fourth. So we know the planets stay in the same signs, but move through the houses, right? This is just relocational astrology 101.
Mm-hmm.
Another favorite example of mine is George Harrison when it comes to parallax moon and the potential of moon when on the cusps changing signs in a relocated chart. So I just want to put this out there because it's fun. It will help me prove a different point. If y'all don't know the parallax moon, it's measuring the experience of the moon from the surface of the earth, right? So, or the topocentric, which means earth surface measurement of the moon versus the geocentric or earth centered measurement. It's the same reason why Portugal today experienced a Venus occultation by the moon. We here in California did not. It has to do with parallax. So, like, this thing right now is eclipsing you, but if I was on this place on Earth, I can see you. Do you see what I'm saying? And like, there was a really wonderful thing in a recent lunar eclipse where somebody was taking video from Arizona and from Australia at the same time. And you could see that the moon was against different stars behind it, right? Because like the moon is actually close enough to Earth that the surface in distance to the moon is significantly different enough from the center of Earth distance from the moon to make a difference, okay? So a fun example with George Harrison, Scorpio moon, and I think his life proves this to be true. But if you look at the parallax consideration, where George Harrison was born in Scorpio, but where he lived in Australia is Libra. Where he lived in Hawaii, it's Libra, just the parallax moon. And he, says that he lived in Hawaii and Australia. Like these were places where he worked on his marriage and was like a family guy. And you could feel more of the Libra thing than the Scorpio stuff that usually caused issues with his wives and his families. So they're just like putting that out there. Now, for those of us who have tuned into the problems of parallax moon versus geocentric, like, why shouldn't we want the calculation of where the moon is in the signs from the place of our birth? Like I was born in Boston, not at the center of Earth. And yet those who have done some research here, I'm one of them, David Cochran's another one, typically find that the geocentric, the Earth center measurement of the moon speaks more in people's experience. And this is a really important truth because if it's the geocentric, the center of the Earth, which is so important because Yuli and Luis, will you both reach your hands up, please, for me, a little experiment? We're all pointing to different stars. Everyone else here right now, you could do the same thing. You're pointing to a different star than I am. But if you come down through your spine, we all meet in that one place we share, which is the center of Earth.
Right. Yeah, not
now,
out there.
That we measure planets in the signs from the center of the Earth, this is geocentric, suggests that astrology is measuring our experience of Earth's experience of the heavens.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
do you feel me? So people argue, well, Jupiter has no pull on you. First of all, he does tidally, but Jupiter has a lot of pull on the Earth, and you are on the Earth. Do you feel me? So, like, what is the global experience of this thing? And now the houses, right, as we call them today, the places, the topos, like that's a very local surface experience. So is your language and your cuisine and your culture and whether there's a war happening down your street or not, And obviously the surface experience matters so much. But at the same time, geocentric astrology, which sidereal astrologers prefer as well, we're speaking about a global experience. And so when I start waving my little armillary sphere around, that's what I'm trying to talk about. I'm trying to talk about there is a global zodiac, and because the Earth is moving through space, because the sun is moving through space, our whole solar system, there is an Earth experience. Now, we on the surface are meant to experience this in different ways. And the great, tale of the eagle and the condor and the balancing of the northern and the southern hemisphere experience, I think, is so important. But when we tune into the geocentric experience of Earth, I think that will tell us a lot about what the signs do, what the nodes do, and more.
I'm just want to maybe pick up on a few of the questions that we've got in the chat and stuff. If you want to pick anything out, I'll just read out Barbara's here. I'm in Australia. Life seems to be sending me towards a more Leo experience. Leo is my south node. I'm being projected more towards performance, singing, orchestras and bands, and my dancing. I'm good at Aquarian traits, but what I do with those traits are remaining just for me mainly. Does this mean instead of becoming Aquarius, I'm meant to follow my Leo tendencies? I mean, like what sits with one better as opposed to being told what, you really should be focusing on. Again, that's kind of my concern, but it sounds like you're leaving both sides, and that's most, significant as well.
Playing a weird band.
Sorry?
That's the problem with directions.
Yeah.
If you establish that there's a direction you should go.
Yeah.
Should you?
Should
the word to use here?
Yes.
Or perhaps you just have to be.
Yes. It incorporates this, this is important to you.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is a problem, because this is a matter of belief, of an idea, of an ideology. You assume that it works that way, and you have certain beliefs. As certain people also associate reincarnation and past lives with the nodes.
Yes.
Does it work like that?
Yeah.
You might not believe in past lives that the universe works that way, so you will interpret it differently. So, I don't think we should be concerned so much with a direction in that sense that we have to go there or we're doomed.
Yeah.
Somehow way, but just to be,
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps
that's the important thing, I think, here as well, just to sort of bring that up for people to consider it, a little bit differently, as opposed to sort of, this is your fate and karma. You must do this in order to live or, grow in this lifetime. Anyway, it's so interesting. Any other questions you want out here? Who is the first notable astrological authority from the Southern Hemisphere in the astronomical record?
Wow, what a cool question.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. There's really not one. There is a guy called Enrico Martinez. I think he was German, who publishes the first almanac in the Southern Hemisphere. Well, in the New World, actually. He's not yet in the Southern Hemisphere. He makes considerations on the Southern Hemisphere, but he's operating in what was done at the time New Spain, so Mexico. And he's the first to make considerations on, we're in a new world, we're in a different continent that no one knew existed, we're very close to the Southern Hemisphere, we have a lot of new stars. How the hell are we going to deal with this? This is the first one to write fully about that from someone who has experienced the Southern Hemisphere. So that's one is the first that I'm aware of. But none of the big names
ever
are
came down here.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen this Southern Cross in Mexico, and I would imagine that the Egyptian astronomers from way back in the day were very connected with people who were living down on the southern side of the continent, right? I mean, the Americas as well, like you don't even need a boat to go. It would be a much faster trip and probably
Yeah.
smarter in that
And
regard.
in the Indian Ocean, they're already navigating to southern latitudes very early on, to the north, to the coast of Africa, Madagascar, and all that area. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there is a study. As far as I'm aware, and I am not a specialist on that area, and the people I spoke, it doesn't seem to
Yeah,
affect
yeah.
their astrology. Their astronomy and navigation, yes, they are aware of it, but not their astrology as far as
Yeah, but I
I'm
mean,
aware.
even same thing, temperate versus tropical with your navigation by the stars, thing change rapidly. And I mean, it's so cool. Like when you travel to other places on the earth, the sky works differently. Like if you learn the sky, you will notice it. It's weird, right?
Mhm.
And you get to meet new stars, and some of your old friends are no longer available to you, right? Like Sirius, where Yulia lives, spends so much time above the ground and is under the beams for a very
Mm.
short portion of the year, right? But so many of these things
Yeah,
are
that's why
also,
the eight Lionsgate thing does not make sense around here.
yeah, why only do it? I mean, that's a weird thing, but at least it rhymes. So does the new page. Anyway, this isn't a problem for sidereal astrology, right? It's like, hey, that node is at that star, and who cares if it's going up or down? Like it's at that star. I mean, I think there's still challenges like in the observational experience, and when you get global, you get to learn things like the earth isn't flat, right? You get to learn, you really like so much of this would have been crucial to the advancement of our science and our technology, just that our ancient, the elders, the founders of our tradition were like moving around. But you
Mm.
get things like, so in like sidereal zodiac, you have to convert to tropical if you want to do Antisha, which is really anti-skia. Skia is Greek for shadow. All right. But the same antishon in northern hemisphere apply in the southern hemisphere, right? So some things are reversed, some things are not. And
Mm.
I think it's kind of a very critical and important conversation in regards to our surface experience, which is our experience,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, and hearing back from the experience is important. We'll have to have like a conclave. We have to meet. We'll have to, have a meeting on the equator.
Yeah, and I would just suggest like when you consider the nodes, folks, consider the sun and the moon and the earth all aligned, right?
Mm.
I've read for some weird reason academics saying that though we have dragon myths about eclipses from many lands, there's none in the Western tradition. And I'm like, what about the serpent in the Garden of Eden
There's
at the
lots of
tree?
there's lots, isn't there?
Well, I think the most
Myth.
interesting one for me is this. It's that when Leto was pregnant with Apollo and Diana, she's chased by Python, right? By the serpent. And then later, and I want to show this image actually, Apollo catches up to that snake and shoots an arrow through its head. All right.
Apollo
And for
being the
me,
sun, Apollo the sun.
Apollo being the sun, now his sister Diana, right? Moon, or a goddess of the moon. Diana's bow is a phrase we use for the young crescent moon, right? Every month. Well, when do you see Apollo's bow? And the answer is only during a solar eclipse. That's the only time you'll ever see a crescent sun. And when you see a crescent sun, what's happening? You're seeing from Earth, moon, sun at a node,
Mm.
right? Where their paths cross. So when Apollo's shooting this arrow through the dragon's head, do you feel it there? Like that is an eclipse myth. And what is that arrow? It's the arrow that aligns the heart of Earth to the hearts of the moon and sun during total eclipse or annular eclipse. But importantly, the nodes are these points at all times. So if you want to know what the nodes are, then tell me what the moon is, tell me what the sun is, And what is it to bring those two together? And if we want to understand complications when the moon's at her bendings every month, as she is, like Luis was speaking about earlier, and some of this in the tradition, well, what is it for the moon to get far from the sun's path? Right? Or are there complications at the nodes as well? In a lot of astrologies, there are when the moon crosses the node. There's this like confluence of the moon and sun. Do you see? So, yeah, I mean, when you ask me, like, how do I work the nodes? The answer is I'm still learning. But, like, for the same reason that I put Black Moon Lilith on a chart, because I want to know if the moon's moving fast or slow, and Lilith will tell me. I want to know if the moon is close to Earth or far away, and looking at the moon's distance from true Black Moon Lilith will tell me, right? I put the nodes on the chart because I want to know more about the moon, and I want to know more about the moon-sun relationship. So Jared wrote in the chat earlier, like, what's up with the nodes retrograding? It's like, why do they do this? And notice some really cool things. Every month when the moon gets to the node, she'll bump them direct. When we're in eclipse season, so when the sun's at the lunar node, the nodes will go retrograde for like a week and direct for a week. And they're like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. They just stay in the same place. But in between eclipse seasons, when the sun is square the nodes, then they're just retrograde, direct retrograde, right?
Well, that's
So
the dragon.
what's up with that? Right? And
Yeah.
so as I'm considering the lunar nodes, I want to add all this data in and try to like come up with my own idea about it. And then usually anytime I do this, it's just like, oh, that's what they told me to believe in the first place. But I need to like sort it out cosmologically, you know? And I think I have a very different opinion of what the moon is and what the sun is than most astrologers do.
Well. This brings up a lot of things. I think next time we have to get someone from South America or even South Africa to the conversation, perhaps. We might have to leave it there for now because Luis, it's getting late for you, and I know you've been teaching all night. But anything else you want to kind of bring up, just to kind of conclude in a way? Again, my idea is that we need to look at it as an axis more than a one direction or one another. Considering that in your own nodal axis and how it moves. And again, I've seen that with many people that I've done work with charts down here. I definitely do not point them in a north node direction, let's say. And of course, considering everything else in the chart. So Luis, what about you? Something to conclude with? Best use scenarios for now.
Yeah, well, I think we have to be cautious, and see and try and experiment. I always tell I have a lot of students from Brazil, so there is this north-south differences, and I do, and this has become an experience in the last decade. So I have been working on this south relationship, and I always tell them, you have to experiment.
Yeah.
See if in a very obvious situation, it has to be very obvious if you can notice a difference or not. Because if you don't see a difference, if practice doesn't show what theory claims, then something is wrong and you have to test it. And I think, and picking up on what Brett was saying, is this: we do need a coherent cosmology, explanation, philosophy for astrology, because astrology had it in the past, even if you don't agree with it, but it had it in the past, and there was a certain coherence around which we could discuss these kinds of things. Nowadays, it is largely a matter of opinion of each astrologer, so we don't have this cohesive structure where we can all agree. There's too many perspectives and it gets confusing. So I think at some point we should have more discussions like this with more people, structure this, and try to have this cosmological explanations, reasons why are we seeing these effects and not seeing in others.
And what things should possibly change or not, or but well, even just the awareness or the consciousness
Yeah,
that this is happening,
exactly.
and we're looking. Yeah,
And go for description, you
yeah,
know. If a book or an author or whoever it is telling you something and you're not observing it exactly as it would be expected to come out in your chart, then something is off. Either we're
mm,
not getting it
yeah,
and our
yeah,
interpretation is
yeah,
flawed,
yeah,
or the theory is flawed and it doesn't work like that, because it has to describe reality, and we cannot force an idea onto
yeah,
reality,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And this has been a problem, I think.
But so many people are being influenced so easily, I think. You see that all the time. I read that again as teachers, as all of us are teachers, we do, tell our students, yeah, if it does not compute, please look at it differently. Do you know what I mean? Like we have to learn with the textbook, cookbook astrology, don't we, somehow? Be it
Yeah.
traditional or modern, but then how we take it, observation, experience is the key in the end, isn't it?
Yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah,
That's
so
why I think, for example, disciplines of astrology like orary or the study of event charts, it's easier and helps you put your mind
yes,
more focused to interpretation, because then you don't have the fluctuations and the relativity that human experience, and human existence has, what you find
yes,
in a natal chart,
yeah,
in a question or something more decisive.
you've got more rules, yeah, you need to follow them.
Either it
It teaches you a
describes it
lot.
or it
Yeah,
doesn't,
yeah,
and there's it's more clear in that sense, and that might help to establish or clarify some of these things.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Luis. We look forward to talking with you
Pleasure.
again.
There's a cool comment here, which is I'm born with my nodes sit on my father's MCIC axis. And it is a thing that I've noticed a lot in kind of family constellation work, just meaning comparing birth charts of family members to one another, ancestors and descendants. That sun and moon on the horizon, on the meridian, and on the nodes is often like more improbably, it seems, statistically aligned. Like I honor the nodes as these super powerful, amazing, magical places. I mean, they are where eclipses happen, and eclipses are the coolest thing of all time. Um, and I'm also a big why guy, which I'm hearing from Luis as well. Like, instead of just being told this is how it is, ask why. And if your teacher can't explain it, right? And even if they can, go see for yourself. It's hard in astrology because there are so many ways to pet the cosmic cat, and you can study one paradigm and run opposite from another. And I agree with Luis, it would be really nice if we could say, hey, this is a science, how does it work? And I think a lot of us are trying to get after that. And, I love like getting into some of the ancient texts, that we've had these things written for so long, but just because it's older doesn't mean it's better either, right? So this is a question we're after, and it's a sacred science. And I don't know, I maintain, I think, as much skepticism as I do the other side of the thing. And for me, I think that's okay. Astrology proves herself to me every day, and still I'm like, why does this thing work and how? And another time, Yuli, I think I've done it here before, but I'll talk about the crystal at the center of the earth, which for me, like this whole global zodiac is like it's what it's led to. And that I want there to be an actual physical reason why the tropical zodiac works, because I see that it does, right? I see that like the moon in Taurus is a thing, and it's not like the moon in Taurus is changing my seasons, right? So it's definitely not seasonal. I've seen it's not star based, and the question is, what is it then? And I found an answer that I can't prove or disprove, but like modern science supports. And I think the hexagon in Saturn also suggests is something that all planets have. So totally different conversation. I'm
Okay.
so stoked to have had this one, Luis. It's really cool to meet you. Um,
Yeah, very nice to meet you.
and
Yeah.
Yulia, thanks so much for always getting the coolest conversations and questions happening at this amazing
Well,
cosmic intelligence.
I I do things that I really want to find out about or, you know, do more work with, that's for sure. So I really appreciate your time, and look, we'll do it again. Hey, let's keep in touch and keep the conversation going and incorporate more other people here and there. Again, hope everyone that's been online, thanks for your comments. When I post up the video on the website, I'll put the conversations in because they're always interesting to read. It's just too much to follow sometimes. What was I going to say? You know, just wrapping it up. It's so interesting, and it's great to have people that are interested in these topics and know how to explain it. I think is really significant. So thank you, my wonderful agent. I'm going to call you an agent, Louise, because you're just natural at this at this work. Anyway, for everyone else, yeah, you can watch a recording on the CIA website or our YouTube channel. Don't forget to join the CIA. We've got these great teachers in here. Louise will get you back next year, maybe for another session. Louise did the best explanation of the house system I've ever seen, and I think it's just amazing. We should make movies like that. Right. And Gemini, of course, you know, your work is astounding as well. So keep up with what the CIA is doing. We do have a retreat in February, which we have some places left. Some are in Australia, and I will work on some kind of conferencey thing down in Australia as well. Wouldn't it be great to have you together? Wouldn't it be great to have these great minds in one place? And
sometime when the sky is clear, okay?
Yes,
that month.
I know the seasons when it's clearer. Yes, for sure. There's a lot of studies you can do down here, that's for sure. Well, it's clearer than I don't know, Europe. Portugal's probably pretty sunny place, isn't it?
Usually.
Yeah, usually. All right. Okay. So Gemini, did you want to conclude by showing us what you saw this morning?
Oh, sure.
Hey, if you play that, you said it had some music. Have you got that or not?
Yeah, it's a little 3-minute thing, so
Okay,
people
well, let's
can, who
conclude with
didn't.
that. A beautiful vision of Venus and the moon this morning. Luis will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. And Gemini, and because I'll shut it off after your thing finishes. How's
Yeah,
that?
I'll just say, like, I wish it had the Cosmic Intelligence Agency logo instead of my school logo on there. So sorry about that. I hope
That's
it's okay.
all right. We
So
like
CosmicIntelligenceAgency.com, folks who haven't been there, who got here in a different way. Luis, do you want to plug your page or school?
Yes, tell us.
It's academyofastrology.eu, and I should have some courses and some activities next year.
Oh, actually, I was going to ask you, what's you're doing a session on the weekend, you said? Is that in Portuguese, or you said you were doing a class?
I'm speaking. Yeah, I'm speaking in a congress in Brazil. So that.
Oh, okay. All right, beautiful. Online,
cool.
or are you going to Brazil?
No, online.
Okay, so maybe you can help us with someone for next time from Brazil or South America.
Yeah,
we did have some agents down there, but we've kind of lost track a bit, which is what happens. Agents go missing. Anyway, all right.
All James Bond.
Well, I've been saying, you know, with the state of the world, it's like, where's James Bond when we need him? They killed him off last time, didn't they?
Bring him back. He needs to come back from the South Node or something about the node. I don't know.
Something like that. But the agent work is good work. The CIA agents, we love astrology. We like to get to the nitty-gritty of it all, and we welcome you to join in. All right, everyone. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend. We'll talk soon. And thanks for the conversation, guys. That was fantastic.